Welcome to the historic blah, a place where the past moves very slowly, where kings wrote letters that took months to arrive, and farmers counted the seasons, one gentle sunrise at a time. Tonight we'll wander through the calm corridors of history, no wars, no drama, just the quiet turning of time. So take a deep breath, let your thoughts drift like leaves on a still pond. And if you find peace in these sleepy stories, you can like, comment, and subscribe. Not out of urgency, but simply whenever you wake up. For now, close your eyes and let history whisper you to sleep. Welcome to Beautifully Boring History. Let us now begin. Story 1. The Villain's Burden, Life on a Lord's Domain. You rise before the cock crows, not because you're eager but because you're required to. You are a villain, a half-free peasant in 13th century England, and the bell from the manor church is your master's clock. It rings through the fog-heavy air to mark the start of your labor not on your own land, but on the Lord's domain. The fields you tend today, the barley you reap, the oxen you drive, none of it belongs to you. Though not a slave, you are bound to this estate, unable to leave without permission, and you owe more than just your labor. There are dues to be paid in kind, in coin, or in crops, and there is service, at least 3 days a week. In harvest time, more. You may own a strip of land in the open fields, but it comes at the price of servitude. The landscape of the feudal countryside. Your village lies nestled along a winding dirt road, about 15 miles from the nearest market town. It's small, perhaps 30 households, each huddled in timber-framed cottages with thatched roofs that leak when it rains too hard. A few pigs roam the muddy lane, a cow bleats in the distance. The parish church stands slightly elevated, a rare stone structure that casts a long shadow at sunset. Beyond it lie the open fields, strip-farmed and divided in narrow rows, each villein working several non-contiguous strips. These fields are divided into thirds, one planted in wheat or rye, one in barley or oats, and one left fallow. It's the open field system, developed over generations to coax sustenance from poor soil. As a villain, you do not choose what to grow or when. Rotations and planting are dictated by custom, by the reeve's orders, and ultimately by what the manor requires. Individualism is a luxury you cannot afford. Duties and dues, the rhythm of obligation. Today, like every Thursday, is a boon day, a day when you must work the Lord's fields. Boon days are not always scheduled. They can be declared on short notice, especially during plowing and harvest. Ignoring such a call can result in a fine or worse. You're lucky if you finish in time to return to your own crops. Aside from labor, you owe dues. These include Harriet, a form of death tax. When your father died, you had to surrender the best beast to the Lord. Tallage, a form of arbitrary taxation, often levied when the Lord needed funds. Merchant, paid when your daughter marries. Yes, you pay to give her away. Shevage, a fee for permission to live away from the village, rare and difficult to obtain. These burdens are written in the manor rolls, kept meticulously by the bailiff and steward, and read aloud at the manorial court. Illiteracy is no shield. You know them by heart, passed down like family legends. The manor court, law at a local level. You do not fear the king's justice. You fear the manor court. Held every few weeks in the Lord's great hall or beneath the old elm tree, it governs your world. Petty offenses are tried here. Disputes over land boundaries, failure to maintain hedges, or stealing firewood from the Lord's forest. You've seen neighbors fined for brewing ale too strong or too weak, for selling bread that's underweight, or for allowing their livestock to trample others' strips. Even your marriage needed the court's approval. Justice is swift, if not always fair, and it reinforces your place in the social order. The Lord or his steward presides, but often leaves decisions to the homage, the dozen or so villagers who serve as a jury of sorts. You may sit among them one day, if you live long enough and remain obedient. The Lord's domain, not just fields. The Lord's domain is more than farmland. It includes the manor house, granary, dovecote, and any mills, woods, or fisheries on the estate. You might be summoned to cut timber, repair fences, dig ditches, or clear underbrush. These tasks are unpaid and often grueling. The mill is of particular importance. By law, you're required to grind your grain there for a fee, of course. The miller takes his cut, and he's often accused of taking too much. But you have no recourse. To use hand mills is illegal, and confiscation is the punishment. Your only relief comes during feast days, when church and community celebrate saints with bread, ale, and song. But even these holy respites are sometimes co-opted by the manor, for they also serve as times for collecting rents or announcing new obligations. Food, clothing, shelter, survival on the margins. You eat coarse rye bread, thick pottage made from peas or beans, and on rare occasions meat. You brew your own ale, weak but nourishing. Salted herring or eel from the stream might appear on your table during Lent. Your home is a simple wattle and daub hut with a thatched roof and dirt floor. Animals may share your space in winter. You own a few wooden bowls, a pot, perhaps a stool. Your clothing is homespun wool, undyed and coarse. Footwear is a luxury. And yet there is dignity in your toil. You know the land better than any lord ever will. You can read the sky, predict frost, and coax barley from stubborn earth. Your knowledge is unspoken, passed in whispers and calloused hands, woven into the very furrows you plow. Religion and routine. The church guides your weeks. Sunday is for Mass, of course, but so are holy days and saints' feasts, marking the calendar with more regularity than the seasons. The village priest may be poor, illiterate even, but he offers the sacraments. Baptisms, marriages, and burials all pass through the church. You do not read Latin, but you know the stories. Adam, Eve, the flood, Christ's passion, these are your moral compass. Heaven and hell are not abstractions. They are real, immediate, and always looming. You tithe a tenth of your produce, even when your children go hungry. The priest assures you that heaven favors the humble. You must believe him. There's little else to hope for. A question unanswered. On a chill evening after work, as the sky glows faintly red and the wind rustles the fallow fields, you wonder quietly, not aloud, never aloud, if this is all life will ever be. You are tied to the soil, and the soil demands everything. But is freedom possible, somewhere beyond the manor, beyond the reach of the steward's rolls and the reeve's call? You've heard of freemen in the towns, of runaway serfs who find refuge and work in the growing cities. Town air makes free, they say. But what must be risked to reach it? You wake with sore hands and aching shoulders. The memory of yesterday's labor still clings to your limbs. Today, the work is your own, but not quite. You are expected to tend your small strips in the open fields, to mend your cottage's fence, to gather enough firewood before the reeve finds you for neglecting your duties. But as you pull your worn woolen tunic over your head, your thoughts drift to something else, something dangerous, something stirring beneath the layers of obedience and repetition. Discontent, not shouted but whispered, not armed but smoldering. For centuries the system has held firm. Lords ruled, villeins served, God watched. Yet even stone weathers, and the feudal order, though it appears unyielding, is not immune to erosion from below. Daily injustices and resentment. It is easy to forget that not all lords are cruel, nor are they all kind. Some absentee landlords rarely visit their estates, leaving management to stewards and bailiffs who enforce obligations with little regard for humanity. Fines are issued with regularity. Dues increase when crops fail. No mercy is shown when illness prevents a villain from fulfilling his week's corvée labor. You remember the old tenant Godric who died last winter. His widow had to pay the Harriet her only ox, the one she used to plow her own strips. She begged the steward to let her keep it. He said he could not break custom. She wept. He wrote it into the rolls. Now she borrows an ox from neighbors or pays rent in labor. These are the events that build resentment not large enough to cause revolt on their own, but they settle like silt in the soul. And over time, they clog the arteries of loyalty. The miller cheats, the reeve plays favorites, the Lord's huntsmen trample your barley and laugh when you protest. Your complaints fall on indifferent ears. You swallow your anger and keep your head bowed, but you are not alone. Quiet acts of resistance. You have never taken up arms, but you have broken rules. Everyone has. Resistance, you learn, does not always come with swords or fire. Sometimes it comes with silence. You remember last autumn's gleaning. After the Lord's harvesters had passed through, you stayed late in the field, scooping leftover grains into your tunic. It was forbidden, of course, but you needed it. Your youngest had grown thin and there was little else to feed him. You brought home enough for 2 loaves. That was your victory. You've also helped neighbors hide livestock from the steward's tally. And more than once, you've sharpened your sickle late at night, whispering to yourself that this tool was yours and no lord could claim it. There are others like you neighbors who pretend to forget boon days, who water down ale to stretch it further, who barter quietly to avoid manorial dues. These are not open rebellions, but they are small, constant affirmations of dignity. You hear stories from beyond your village, villains who flee to the forests, who vanish into towns and start anew. The penalty is harsh capture, means branding or mutilation, but if they can evade detection for a year and a day, they are free. Town air makes free. The words echo again. Even the church speaks of spiritual equality. In sermons, you hear that all souls are equal before God. A contradiction hangs in the air. If God sees all as equal, why do men remain bound? Towns and freemen, a distant hope. The town is a mystery, a place of flickering rumors and half-true tales. A freeman there owns his own land, answers to no lord, pays taxes directly to the king. The streets are cobbled, some say. There are guilds, shops, and men who read and write for coin. You've never seen it, but the weaver's nephew went there 3 winters ago and never returned. Some say he found work as a porter. Others say he was caught and hanged. No one knows for sure. But the idea persists. In quiet moments, you allow yourself to wonder, what would it be like to earn coin for your own labor, to keep what you grow, to speak without fear of being fined for your words? Yet fear holds you. Not just fear of punishment, but fear of the unknown. You've never left the village. You do not know the roads. You have a wife, children, a life built however modest around familiarity. Is hope worth the risk? The role of the reeve, peasant or enforcer. Not all peasants share your doubts. Some rise within the manor's structure. The reeve is one such man. He is a villain like you, elected yearly by the village to act as liaison between the Lord and the people. But his role is complex. He collects dues, organizes labor, and reports failures to the bailiff. He knows who delays their plowing, who skips a boon day, who hides their pigs. You once saw him wield real authority, ordering a fine against a cotter who had borrowed a plow without permission. Yet he still lives among you. He drinks at the same tavern, prays in the same church, and tills his strips when his duties allow. You do not envy him. His position is fraught, liked by none, distrusted by all. But his closeness to the Lord's agents gives him a fragile influence. Some reeves grow arrogant. Others crumble under pressure. Most simply try to survive, caught between 2 worlds. You wonder, would you accept the role if elected? Could you turn against your neighbors for the privilege of less labor and slightly more respect? Women in the village work without recognition. Your wife works as hard as you, though the records will never show it. She rises early, tends the garden, spins wool, bakes bread, cares for children, and helps in the fields during planting and harvest. Her labor is expected, invisible, and unacknowledged by the manor roles. She knows the herbs that heal. She keeps the household in order. When you are ill, she takes your place. And if you die, she must pay to remain in the cottage, perhaps remarry quickly, lest she lose both shelter and livelihood. She does not speak of freedom as you do, but you've seen her gaze into the distance, toward the road that winds out of the village. You wonder what she sees. Women rarely flee the manor. The risks are greater. A lone woman on the road is vulnerable. But in the town, they say, widows can remarry whom they choose. Daughters can become apprentices or seamstresses. In towns, some women are brewers or midwives, important, even respected. In the village, a woman is defined by her relationship to a man, wife, widow, daughter. But her strength is undeniable. Without her, the household collapses. Custom and control. What keeps you here truly? Fear, yes. Obligation, yes. But also custom, that powerful, subtle force which holds the system in place even when no lord is present. Custom is not written. It is lived. It is the expectation that you will plant your barley in the 3rd week of March, that you will give a portion to the priest, that you will bow at the court and pay your merchant when your daughter weds. It is what makes rebellion so hard, not just the punishment, but the weight of aught. Even if the Lord were just, the system itself would grind you down. It is designed to extract, not nurture. It survives because it convinces you that nothing else is possible. And yet, the world is changing. Slowly, yes, but it is changing. Towns are growing. Trade is expanding. Roads that were once dangerous are now traveled by merchants and messengers. Coin is becoming more common. Some lords now accept rent in silver rather than labor. A neighbor of yours recently bought his freedom. He saved for years, sold a pig, worked for a traveling merchant during the winter, and paid the steward in coin. He is now a freeman, still a peasant, yes, but unbound. No boon days, no merchant, no Harriet. He still lives here, but his gait is different. His eyes no longer lower when the steward passes. He speaks more freely. Others have noticed. Some admire him, others mutter. But his freedom is real. The storm to come. You've heard rumors from other shires. Peasants refusing to pay new tallages. Millers who have been run out of town. Villages where the reeve sides with the people instead of the lord. Is it rebellion or just hunger? The tension is rising. Lords ask for more labor, more dues. Crops have failed in some regions. And when famine comes, it takes no account of status. What happens when the weight of custom becomes unbearable? What happens when the whispers become plans? You watch your eldest son drive the oxen through the frost-hardened soil, his hands already blistered, his back already bent. You wonder if this life will be his as well, or if change, slow, uncertain, dangerous change, might come in his time. And if it does, what role will you play in shaping it? You did not set out to be a witness to history. Few villains ever do. You were born into a world shaped by routines older than memory, where the boundaries of land, custom, and expectation are as fixed as the seasons. But now, something stirs across the countryside. The old order creaks. Tensions that have simmered in silence for generations are beginning to rise, and whispers carry further than before. Even in your quiet village, far from the manors of the great lords or the courts of kings, the winds of change are beginning to blow. The crack in the system. It began with new demands. The steward arrived one April morning to read the latest decree, a new tax, tallage once more. For the good of the realm, he declared, to fund the king's campaigns abroad. But you remember the last tallage. The year after poor rains, when grain rotted in the fields and hunger crept into every cottage. You remember giving up your only chicken to settle a fine, and now they ask for more. Voices murmur around the manor green after the announcement. Some call for patience, others speak of resistance. You see eyes narrow, jaws tighten. Your neighbor's daughter has lost her job in the Lord's kitchen. A new sergeant at arms patrols the nearby road. Things are changing. You did not expect what came next, nor did anyone. The great pestilence. It arrives not as a whisper but a storm. The year is 1348. News comes first from the port towns. people dying in days, whole families swept away. The pestilence spreads fast, unstoppable. They call it the Black Death. It reaches your village that autumn. You do not forget the fear, nor the silence. People fall ill with swellings beneath their arms, high fevers, black blotches on the skin. The priest dies in a week, then the miller, then your neighbor's 3 children. Coffins are few, graves are many. And then it touches your own family. You survive, but your youngest does not. When the pestilence finally moves on, half the village is gone. Entire households vanish. Cottages stand empty, doors swinging in the wind. The fields go untended. The manor loses control. In the sorrow, a strange thing takes root: opportunity. Laborers in demand. With so many dead, the economy begins to shift. Lords, desperate for labor, offer wages to men who once worked for free. The peasants know their value now. You see neighbors move from one village to another, taking better offers. Even you, once silent and obedient, begin to speak differently. When the steward asks for extra labor, you shake your head. Let him find someone else, you say. He doesn't argue. But the ruling class fights back. In 1351, the king issues the Statute of Laborers, a law fixing wages at pre-plague levels, forbidding peasants from demanding more or moving without permission. It's an attempt to restore the old order. But you know the truth. That world is gone. It died with the pestilence. The tension returns. The peasants revolt. In 1381, the match is struck. Across the south of England, peasants rise. Sparked by another hated tax, a poll tax imposed on every person regardless of wealth, the revolt spreads quickly. From Kent to Essex, villages burn manor rolls, attack royal officials, and march toward London. You do not join them, but you hear their words. They are not rebels in the traditional sense. They carry no grand banners, but they are tired of being ignored. They chant. When Adam delved and Eve span, who then was the gentleman? A simple question, a powerful one. In London, rebels break into the Tower, execute the Chancellor, confront the young King Richard II. For a moment, it seems everything might change. But the rebellion is crushed. Its leaders like Wat Tyler are killed. The promises made by the king are broken. Fear returns. Yet something has shifted. Even as the crown tightens control, the world cannot return to what it was. You feel it in your bones. The rise of the freeman. Over the next decades, a new figure begins to appear across England's countryside: the free tenant. Some are former villains who paid their dues and bought freedom. Others are descendants of those who moved during the plague years and were never bound again. They rent land directly, pay with coin, and owe no labor. The lord's domain shrinks. He can no longer force labor from villagers who now demand wages or leave altogether. The manorial court still meets, but fewer attend. The steward's word carries less weight. In some regions, entire manors fall into disuse, leased out or abandoned. You too make a decision. One spring morning, you take a small bag of coin earned through side labor and careful savings and approach the steward. You present it, along with a simple request: freedom. He blinks, stunned, then nods. He writes your name into the manor roll one last time, then strikes it through. You are no longer a villain. You are now a freeman. You return home with a strange feeling. Relief, yes, but also unease. What now? Freedom, it turns out, is not just a gift. It is a responsibility. A new role in the old world. Your life does not change overnight. You still farm. You still walk the same paths, tend the same soil, greet the same neighbors. But your labor is now your own. You negotiate your rent. You choose your days of work. When the steward speaks, you listen, but you no longer bow. Your children grow up in a different world. They learn to read. You arrange for your eldest to apprentice with a blacksmith in the nearby town. Your daughter, once destined for early marriage, now earns coin as a weaver. You are not noble, you do not own great estates, but you are free. And that freedom won slowly, painfully, over generations is enough. Reflection, the long memory of oppression. Looking back, you realize the feudal system did not collapse in fire. It decayed gently, slowly, under the weight of its own rigidity. Pestilence, revolt, and economics all played their part, but so did the quiet persistence of those who simply wanted to live with dignity. The villain's burden was heavy, but not eternal. Your story, though not recorded in royal chronicles or monastic manuscripts, is the story of millions, of men and women who endured, resisted, adapted, and survived. And in doing so, they reshaped a continent. Today, few remember the names of the villains, but they remember the world that came after one, where towns flourished, trade expanded, and the bonds of birth began to loosen. You did not set out to change the world, but by surviving it you did. Story 2. Tithes, Taxes, and Tanistry, the Economics of Feudal Control. You live in a world of obligations, not just to your lord but to your church, your king, and at times your own kin. It is a world where coin is rare, and yet somehow everyone seems to want a portion of it. You are told it is for protection, for salvation, for law, for the land you farm. You are not a merchant or a noble. You are a smallholder, a tenant, perhaps a villain, but like nearly everyone around you, your life is governed by economic obligations that seem to stretch wider than the sky and deeper than the soil. The feudal economy is not one of open markets and negotiated contracts. It is a web of inherited rights, local customs, religious duties, and blood ties. And behind each tithe, each tax, each inherited rule, there lies the slow-moving engine of control. This is not the history of conquest or kings. This is the history of what people owed and why that mattered. The tithe, the church's invisible hand. It is said the soul must be fed as well as the body, but feeding the church comes first. A tithe is 1/10 of all that you produce. 10% of your grain, your eggs, your livestock, even the flax you grow for linen. It is not optional. It is God's due, or so the priest says. The parish priest collects it on behalf of the church, sometimes kindly, sometimes not. It might go to support the local church, or be forwarded to a monastery far away, or even collected by a distant bishop who never steps foot in your village. Where it ends up is not your concern. You just pay it. You learn early in life to plan your planting with the tithe in mind. 10 sheaves for the family, 1 for the priest. 10 eggs for the market, 1 for the tithe barn. The church keeps a tally, and if you forget or fudge the count, it is not just shame you risk, but eternal damnation. Not all tithes are paid in kind. By the late Middle Ages, commuted tithes, those paid in coin, become common in towns. But in rural places like yours, produce is still the standard. You see it carried to the tithe barn, a large timber-framed building looming behind the churchyard, its doors wide enough for a cart and oxen. Some grumble about it, a few try to cheat, but most obey, because the tithe is older than memory and older than most kings. Feudal rents and tallages, the lord's share. The lord of the manor has his own demands. If you are a villain, you owe labor days spent plowing his fields, repairing his fences, or working his harvest. But increasingly, lords seek coin. Enter the feudal rent, a confusing maze of dues. Rent in kind, barley, cheese, or firewood. Rent in coin, if you are lucky enough to earn any. Labor rent, which is still common, especially in less monetized regions. On top of that, lords may impose tallage, a form of arbitrary taxation often declared without warning. There is no appeal. The bailiff reads the demand in court, and you must pay. Why the tallage? It might be for the lord's new hall, or a daughter's dowry, or a campaign to assist the king. The reason matters little. You must pay. Tallages hit hardest when the harvest is poor. You may sell a pig or a cask of ale, or go into debt to a neighbor. Failing to pay means fines. Repeated failure means eviction. The manor court enforces these dues. It meets regularly, not to settle crimes but to track obligations. Your payments, your defaults, your every duty are logged into court rolls, kept safe in the manor chest. These records endure longer than your memory. The royal taxation system, loyalty as currency. Then there is the king. You may never see him. His court is a distant idea, a shimmering shadow heard of only through traveling clerks or royal writs. Yet his needs echo in your village. The king funds his wars, castles, and government through royal taxation. In theory, taxes require approval from Parliament, particularly after the Magna Carta. In practice, they are imposed in urgent times, usually for war. There are several forms. Aid, a request, though rarely optional for help during times of need. Scutage, payment in lieu of military service, especially by knights and minor nobles. Poll tax, a head tax equal per person regardless of wealth, deeply hated. Carucage and 15th tenths, based on property and land value. As a peasant, you may not pay all of these directly, but the burden trickles down. If your lord is taxed, he will recover it from you. If the church is taxed, it demands higher tithes. If the towns are taxed, the price of salt and grain rises. The ripple effect of royal finance reaches your kitchen, your seed store, your children's diet. Tanistry and Gaelic traditions, a different kind of inheritance. Not all of feudal Europe follows the same rules. In Ireland, Scotland, and parts of Wales, a parallel system of control exists, one bound not by rigid inheritance, but by tanistry. Tanistry is the practice by which leadership, particularly among Gaelic clans, is passed not to the eldest son, but to the most suitable male relative, a brother, an uncle, a cousin. The chosen heir, the tanist, is often elected by a council of elders while the chief is still alive. This system prioritizes strength and competence over birth order, but it creates tension, constant jockeying for influence, challenges to legitimacy, and fractured loyalties. Tanistry has economic consequences. In England, land passes to the eldest son. In Gaelic regions, it is often shared among the male kin, split or rotated according to clan rules. Control over land is political, and disputes are frequent. As English rule spreads, so does pressure to abandon tanistry in favor of primogeniture, the inheritance model that simplifies ownership and conveniently makes taxation easier. For the English crown, uniformity means control and tax revenue. But among the Gaelic lords, tanistry dies hard. Coin and commerce, the rise of the market economy. Gradually, coin begins to infiltrate even the most isolated villages. Market towns flourish. Weekly fairs emerge, protected by royal charters. Guilds regulate trade, and merchants travel further than ever before. Monetization changes the peasant's world. Instead of owing labor, you can offer coin. If you're clever, you might rent land from a struggling knight or sell surplus produce at market. Over time, some peasants' yeomen accumulate enough wealth to rival minor lords. But coin also brings vulnerability. A bad harvest, an illness, or a failed investment can ruin you. Creditors loom larger than lords. You may lose land not through war but through debt. And unlike labor, coin is always scarce. Lords now expect it, priests prefer it, royal officials demand it. The peasant is squeezed not just by obligation, but by inflation. The hidden cost of obedience. What do you receive in exchange for all these payments? Protection, sometimes, if the local lord maintains a militia or offers refuge during raids, but not always. Justice, the manor court is swift but favors the powerful. Royal courts are expensive and distant. Salvation, the priest offers sacraments, yes, but confession does not fill your belly. In truth, the economy of obligation is less about services rendered than structures maintained. Each tax, tithe, or tribute reinforces a social order where power flows upward. You may never challenge it, but you feel its weight. Even your children inherit it. An open question. And yet, just as the burden seems fixed, stories begin to spread. Of villages refusing the poll tax, of yeomen challenging their lords in court, of knights defaulting on loans and losing their lands, of towns buying their own charters and becoming free boroughs. What happens when the lords need coin more than labor? What happens when peasants become landowners? When markets overtake manors? You pay your dues, you carry your tithe to the priest, you hand your rent to the steward, but at night by candlelight you ask yourself, what happens to a system when those at the bottom learn the cost of everything, yet owe allegiance to none? You've paid your dues. Tithe after tithe, levy after levy, you've handed over sheaves of barley, jars of honey, strings of eggs, and every spare coin scraped together from a year's labor. You've stood in line at the manor court, head bowed, waiting to hear your name called for another tallage or fine. You've watched as your neighbors lost livestock or land, sometimes both, because they could not keep up. You've seen firsthand how the very structure of medieval society was not simply political or religious, but economic at its core, a system in which allegiance was enforced not only with swords and parchment, but with coin, produce, and bloodline. And still, the burdens remain unequal. This is the story not only of what people were forced to give, but how, across decades and across realms, they began to say no. Lords, loyalty, and financial fragility. A common assumption in the medieval world is that lords are powerful because they are rich. In truth, many are not. Landed knights and minor nobles often live on the brink of insolvency. A bad harvest, a failed marriage alliance, or a single conflict can unravel their entire estate. A dowry unpaid, a scutage uncollected, a debt left simmering in parchment. The need to extract value from their lands pushes lords to increase rent and tallage, often stretching custom until it breaks. New charges emerge. Entry fines for taking over a deceased father's land. Relief to inherit land. Harriets claiming the best beast upon death. Even seemingly minor obligations like repairing a bridge or supplying timber become an excuse for fines. Lords need revenue. Villains become targets. This creates a paradox. The power of the nobility rests on land, but land means nothing without laborers and tenants. Push too hard, and those tenants vanish into towns, into rebellion, or into silence. And lords, desperate to avoid appearing weak, double down. The peasant's calculus: stay, submit, or flee. To the ordinary peasant, every payment is a calculation. Can I afford to lose this pig? Will I make it through winter if I sell this barley? Is the reeve looking the other way? Runaway peasants become more common in the 14th century. The promise of freedom in towns is no longer rumor, it is reality. A villain who escapes and lives a year and a day in a chartered town can claim freedom under customary law. Lords begin to post fugitive rolls, demanding the return of laborers. Stewards track families, updating records obsessively. Rewards are offered, but enforcement is inconsistent. Sometimes peasants do not flee, they negotiate. With land shortages, lords find themselves in competition for tenants. They offer fixed rents, grant leases in writing, even sell freedom charters for silver. What was once custom becomes contract. This shift from obligation to agreement is slow, uneven, but irreversible. Taxation without representation, the poll tax crisis. In 1377, 1379, and again in 1381, the English crown issues the poll tax, a flat-rate tax on every individual over the age of 14, regardless of status or income. It is deeply resented. The tax itself is not the highest ever imposed, but its nature flat, impersonal, universal feels unjust. A wealthy merchant pays the same as a shepherd. A baron's wife pays the same as a servant girl. For many peasants, it is the final insult. Worse still, tax assessors travel door to door, recording names, estimating assets. They intrude on the intimate spaces of peasant life, often under guard. Villagers lie, hide, bribe, or resist. Clashes occur. In June of 1381, a revolt breaks out in Kent and Essex. Peasants storm manorial records, destroy tax rolls, hang officials, and march on London. They demand not just lower taxes, but an end to serfdom, fixed rents, and freedom to sell their labor. It is not a riot, it is a manifesto. The revolt is eventually crushed, but the shock it delivers to the ruling classes is profound. The poll tax is never collected again. Tanistry under siege, Gaelic resistance to royal economics. In Ireland and the Scottish Highlands, tanistry continues to challenge the feudal norms imported from Norman and English rulers. English law promotes primogeniture, clean, predictable inheritance through the eldest son. It simplifies taxation, ensures estates remain intact, and supports royal control. But Gaelic lords resist. They maintain the elective tradition of tanistry, rotating leadership within family lines and dividing land communally. This confounds English administrators who cannot pin down ownership for tax purposes. Records break, courts stall. The English crown introduces laws like surrender and regrant, inviting Irish chieftains to surrender their lands to the king and receive them back with English titles under English law. Some accept, others refuse. Those who accept find themselves tangled in a new world of royal bureaucracy, court summons, and rent rolls. Those who refuse remain targets of legal pressure, of economic strangulation, of eventual military conquest. Tanistry does not vanish, but it is pushed to the margins, a cultural casualty of the feudal economy. Monastic wealth and the rise of ecclesiastical estates. The church is not only spiritual, it is economic. By the 13th century, monastic orders like the Cistercians and Benedictines owned vast estates, rivaling noble families in both wealth and manpower. Tithes flow steadily to abbeys. Rents are collected from thousands of tenants. Monks are landlords, overseeing granges, mills, and vineyards. They often hire lay brothers or professional bailiffs to run operations. And though some remain charitable, others are ruthless rent collectors. The irony is thick. The same church that preaches humility and poverty enforces strict economic control. Peasants cannot challenge it. The church is both their landlord and their path to heaven. In later centuries, monastic corruption becomes a justification for reform. But in this moment, their role in feudal economics is unquestioned and immense. Legal literacy and the birth of contracts. As coin circulates and literacy rises, more peasants begin to understand the language of law. Copyhold documents emerge, written leases guaranteeing land rights, rents, and freedoms. These papers, kept in manor chests or with priests, provide security. They also offer a means of resistance. If a lord tries to increase rent or impose labor without cause, the tenant produces his copyhold. It is written, he says. And sometimes the steward backs down. This shift from oral custom to written agreement marks a quiet revolution. It empowers tenants. It weakens arbitrary power. It creates expectation of fairness. Not equality, not freedom, but predictability, which for many is a kind of justice between old systems and new realities. By the late 14th and early 15th centuries, the foundations of the feudal economy begin to wobble. Some peasants now pay fixed money rents rather than labor or produce. Serfdom persists but shrinks, especially in Western Europe. Towns grow, and urban economies challenge rural dominance. Royal bureaucracies expand, seeking taxation without lords. Peasants demand, and sometimes win representation and redress. Yet many parts of Europe remain feudal in structure. In Eastern Europe, serfdom expands, lasting until the modern era. Even in the West, noble families reassert power through enclosures, privatization, and new taxes. The old system does not fall, it mutates. The question becomes, who adapts and who is left behind? You have watched the cycle for decades now. You've seen stewards come and go, watched scribes update the manor rolls in increasingly empty halls, heard priests grumble about smaller tithes and leaner harvests. You've survived tallages, poll taxes, pestilence, and rebellion. Your hands are calloused, your eyes sharper, your thoughts more restless. Something has shifted not all at once, not everywhere, but undeniably. The economic system that once bound every villager, noble, and cleric together is unraveling thread by thread. Not with a crash, but with a quiet and persistent fray. This is the final chapter in the story of how the economy of feudal control began to loosen, and how a new world slowly emerged from the fall of the old. Serfdom in decline, the withering of labor obligation. By the 15th century, the term villein becomes increasingly rare in many parts of Western Europe. While the legal status of unfreedom remains on paper in many manors, the practice is fading. Lords, especially those who suffered heavy losses during the Black Death, find it more profitable to lease land at a fixed rent than to extract labor from reluctant tenants. Wages rise and freedom becomes a commodity, often sold for a lump sum. The manor court still convenes, but fewer attend. The domain, the lord's personal land, may lie fallow, leased out to a tenant or sold altogether. Serfdom doesn't disappear overnight. In France, England, and parts of the Low Countries, it declines gradually, sometimes persisting into the 16th century. In Eastern Europe, it will even strengthen, as landlords respond to grain demands from Western markets by reimposing tight control on their labor force. But in your village, typical of much of Western Europe's serfdom, is dying quietly. No proclamations, no declarations, just fewer obligations and more choices. From custom to contract, the birth of a market ethos. Once your ancestors worked their land because custom demanded it. Now, you negotiate your rent. What was once assumed is now written and bargained. You have a copyhold, a lease specifying what you owe and what protections you receive. It is not perfect. Lords can still manipulate courts, but it is a shield, however thin. Merchants now visit regularly. You've learned to sell wool, not just grain. You've learned to hire help at harvest, to save coin for the winter, to assess market prices with caution and cunning. The rules of survival have changed. You no longer think in terms of tribute and tithe, but in value and return. You calculate, you plan. This is not capitalism, not yet, but it is something new, a world where labor is mobile, coin has power, and agreements matter more than oaths. Enclosure and the consolidation of land. Just as peasants gain some ground, a new threat emerges: enclosure. Lords who once leased land now see greater profit in consolidating it for pasture, particularly for sheep. Wool sells well, and open fields are inefficient. They begin to enclose common lands, those shared spaces where villagers grazed animals, gathered firewood, and foraged for food. The impact is devastating. Families lose access to land they depended on. Small tenants are pushed out. The poorest, those without secure leases, are evicted altogether. Some protest, even riot. In England, early enclosure riots erupt in the Midlands. Authorities take note, but enforcement is weak. For many, it feels like an inversion of old oppression. Before, you worked too much for the Lord. Now, you're not allowed to work the land at all. A new kind of power is emerging, not the old feudal lord, but the rentier landowner, who manages property like a ledger. The language changes too. You are no longer a villein or tenant in homage. You are a renter or a vagrant. The Reformation and the collapse of monastic economies. Then comes the Reformation, and with it, the dissolution of the monasteries in places like England. The Church, once one of the largest landowners, sees its estates seized, sold, or redistributed by monarchs eager to assert authority and gain revenue. The tithe system weakens, especially where Protestant reformers strip it of legitimacy. Priests still preach, but their economic hold has fractured. In towns and rural regions alike, the monastic landlord is replaced by a secular one, often a nobleman, merchant, or even upwardly mobile commoner. The spiritual justification for extraction vanishes. In its place, legalism and market logic grow. Tithes remain, but enforcement becomes patchy. Some are commuted to fixed payments, others vanish entirely. Suddenly, the centuries-old relationship between peasant and church, economic as much as spiritual, is broken. Tanistries fall, the final blow to Gaelic autonomy. In the Celtic lands of Ireland and the Scottish Highlands, the old system of tanistry and clan-based tenure limps toward its end. English and lowland Scottish authorities view elective inheritance as unstable, chaotic, and most importantly, untaxable. Step by step, they replace it with feudal charters, titles, and parcels, all neatly measured for revenue purposes. The flight of the Earls in 1607, when the last Gaelic lords of Ulster flee Ireland, marks the death knell of native systems. The plantation system soon follows, parceling out clan lands to English and Scottish settlers under strict economic terms. Where once chieftains ruled by kinship and tradition, now landowners rule by survey and signature. Tanistry survives only in song, memory, and resistance. Urbanization and the decline of manorial life. The towns, once peripheral, now become centers of economic life. Guilds organize labor, markets thrive, literacy rises, artisans and traders grow in wealth. Townspeople negotiate directly with monarchs for charters of liberties, freedom from feudal dues, rights to self-govern. For the rural poor, towns offer freedom and danger in equal measure. Some thrive as apprentices, clerks, or servants. Others become vagrants or beggars. The old model where wealth came from land and power came from heredity is still dominant, but no longer absolute. Now wealth also comes from skill, risk, and trade. It is not yet a modern world, but it is no longer a feudal one. Memory of obligation, the ghost of feudalism. Even as the legal frameworks of serfdom fade, and the church's tithe barns rot into disuse, the memory of feudal economics lingers. In the way land is still hoarded. In the language of lordship and tenure. In the unequal expectations of labor and obedience. Custom remains a powerful ghost. You tell your grandchildren stories not of kings and knights, but of tithes paid in barley, of coins scraped from dirt floors, of fines for marrying without consent. They listen with wide eyes, uncertain whether to feel gratitude or fear. And perhaps that is the final victory of the system. It lasted long enough to shape the very idea of what life should be. But you know, as you sit beside your rented hearth with food earned by your own hand and no reeve at your door, that something broke free in your lifetime. Not loudly, but irrevocably. Final reflection, the long shadow of feudal finance. The feudal economy did not collapse in a single moment of rebellion, reform, or revolution. It dissolved slowly, undone by disease, resistance, greed, and change. Its power lay not just in knights and castles, but in unpaid labor, arbitrary fines, ritual obligation, and interlocking loyalties. It was sustained by a belief that hierarchy was natural, that poverty was spiritual, and that allegiance was economic as much as political. By the end, those beliefs no longer held. Peasants became tenants, lords became landlords, Obligations became contracts, custom gave way to coin. And though inequality remained, it was of a new kind, less visible perhaps, but no less real. The burdens changed, but they never truly disappeared. Story 3. The manorial court justice in a world without lawyers. You stand in the shade of a great elm tree. Its branches stretch far overhead, a quiet canopy above the gathering crowd. Sunlight filters through the leaves, dappling the packed earth below. Around you, villagers murmur quietly, some anxious, others amused. A pig has gone missing. Someone's hedge has collapsed into another's field. A widow is accused of brewing sour ale. This is the manorial court, the heart of local governance in much of medieval Europe. There are no wigs, no robes, no barristers or judges. Just the steward, the reeve, a handful of jurors from the village, and the Lord's bailiff, often watching in silence. Justice here is not written in books, but spoken in habit, upheld by memory, enforced by fines, and recorded in fragile rolls of parchment. This is the story of law without lawyers, of a world where guilt and innocence were decided by custom, reputation, and the shape of one's fence. The structure of the court. The manorial court was not a single institution, but a term for a collection of local courts held on the manor, administered by or on behalf of the lord. There were typically two main kinds. Court baron, focused on free tenants and their obligations, land transfers, inheritance, leases. Court leet, concerned with local law and order, minor offenses, public nuisances, policing, and enforcement. In many villages, the two blended together. The same steward might preside over both, the same villagers summoned as jurors or witnesses. The court typically met every few weeks or months, depending on local custom, the size of the manor, or the temperament of the lord. In larger estates, the court might be held in the manor hall beneath a decorative hammer-beam roof, but in most villages it was simpler. A large tree, a long bench, a table with the court rolls, ink, and quills. No Latin here, no trained lawyers, just the spoken law of the manor, as remembered and reinforced by those who lived under it. The role of the steward and reeve. The steward is the lord's man, educated, literate, and often trained in administration. He does not rule by force but by record. It is he who opens the court session, who reads the previous rulings aloud, who announces the business of the day. He represents the absent lord and has the power to fine, assign duties, or issue warnings. But the steward does not act alone. He relies on the reeve, a villager like you, elected or occasionally appointed from among the tenants. The reeve is the go-between. He organizes labor, reports absences, and knows who owes what. If the steward is the letter of the law, the reeve is its pulse. The tension between them is subtle but constant. One speaks with ink, the other with the weight of communal knowledge. Jurors and the voice of the village. Most striking is the fact that you and your neighbors enforce the court. The homage, or jury, is composed of local men, free and unfree alike, tasked with presenting complaints, judging disputes, and upholding local order. They do not argue cases, they declare facts. You are called to the homage one autumn. You do not want to go, but refusal incurs a fine. As a juror, you are expected to report wrongdoers, help resolve boundary disputes, and remember past agreements. You are not trained, but you know the land, the people, the customs. That's enough. There is no presumption of innocence, no impassioned speeches. The steward turns to you and asks, "Who allowed their sheep to graze the Lord's meadow?" And you answer, not as an investigator, but as a witness to your own world. Common cases: fences, ale, and fallow fields. What does justice look like in a world without lawyers? It looks like broken hedges. One of the most frequent offenses is failure to maintain boundaries: hedges that have grown thin, ditches left undug, fences that allow livestock to wander. These aren't abstract matters. A cow on the loose can destroy a season's barley in a day. Another common issue is ale specifically, unlicensed or poor quality ale. Brewing was one of the few economic activities open to women, and many cottagers sold small batches from their homes. But quality mattered. Thin or sour ale could lead to fines. So too with weights and measures. Bakers might be fined for undersized loaves, butchers for selling poor meat, millers for taking too much grain. Other common matters include failure to attend boon work, unauthorized tree cutting, keeping pigs unringed, letting geese roam. The offenses are small, but the fines accumulate, and each judgment reinforces the invisible web of order. The ritual of the rolls. Every session of the court ends the same way, with a careful recording of decisions into the court roll. A clerk, often young and silent throughout the proceedings, dips his quill in ink and scribes each entry on parchment. These records are stored in a manor chest along with leases, tallies, and charters. The rolls are sacred. If the steward forgets your debt, the roll remembers. If you challenge a judgment, the roll speaks. And while you may not be able to read it, you know what it says. Because the roll is reread aloud at the next session, names spoken, offenses recited, fines recorded. Memory becomes record, and record becomes power. Justice without mercy. Is the manorial court fair? It depends who you are. For the lord, it is a tool to maintain order and revenue. For the steward, a ledger. For the reeve, a responsibility. For the villager, it is both protector and oppressor. Some find justice there. A widow whose land was encroached upon. A cottager whose tools were stolen. Others find only fines. There is little space for appeals. No higher authority cares about broken hedges or weak ale. You might complain to the church court, but they care for sin, not fences. You live within the bounds of what your neighbors will accept, what your steward will enforce, and what your memory can recall. You do not speak of rights, you speak of custom. An unresolved thought. You walk home after the court adjourns. You pass judgment on your neighbor. You confessed your own offense, an unwrung piglet. You paid your fine with a tight-lipped nod. But you wonder, what would justice look like if it were written not by custom, but by fairness? What if the law could be challenged? What if you could defend yourself with more than reputation and silence? The court is part of your world, but the world is changing. Rumors come from towns of trained advocates, of judges in robes, of charters that guarantee liberties on parchment sealed in wax. Law that is not just spoken, but argued. You've never seen such a place. But you wonder if justice might someday live beyond the shadow of the elm tree. You arrive early this time. The court meets after Michaelmas, and the chill in the morning air reminds you the fields will soon be hard with frost. You pull your hood close, not to hide your face, but to block the wind. Today, you are not a juror. You are a plaintiff. Your neighbor's son let their cattle graze on your strip, trampling your winter wheat. You have no parchment to prove the land is yours, only the memory of your father's claim, repeated by word and by harvest over decades. You're not angry, just tired. You want the grain replaced or the damage acknowledged. You want your small part of the world to feel fair. That is why you're here. Because in this time and place, the manorial court is the only place where justice can be spoken aloud. Memory as law. There is no law library here. The steward has a few books, mostly records of royal statutes and manor customs, but the true source of law lies in memory. In manorial courts, precedent is not written in dusty tomes, but held in the spoken traditions of the village. The homage remembers who planted what, who owed what, who cut down a tree 5 winters ago. This shared memory is binding. The phrase, "we have always done it this way," is more powerful than a king's edict. Disputes are settled by referring to the past not as a philosophical exercise, but as a practical one. The line of trees marks the boundary. It always has. That land was part of her dowry when she wed. He was fined for this before, and the fine was 3 pence. This makes justice accessible but fragile. If memory fails, so does the claim. If the steward mistrusts a witness, the truth vanishes. In this system, your reputation is everything. Reputation and social capital. You may be poor, but if you are well regarded, your voice carries weight. The manorial court operates not in a vacuum, but within a web of social relationships. Your standing as a worker, a parent, a churchgoer all shape how your case is received. A man who is helpful, respectful, and obedient is more likely to receive leniency or support. A known drunkard, a quarrelsome neighbor, a serial offender, these types are fined more heavily, their pleas more often ignored. It is not impartial justice, it is communal negotiation. You know that if you accuse someone, your own character will be weighed alongside your complaint. This discourages false claims. It also silences some truths. People learn to balance justice with discretion. The court is not for every grievance. Some matters are settled over ale, others are buried in silence. But when the damage is public like trampled crops, you have little choice. You speak not just for your field, but for your family standing in the village. The steward's authority. The steward is a curious figure, powerful, yet limited. He represents the lord of the manor, but rarely wields personal power. His authority is administrative. He does not swing a sword or arrest criminals. He writes fines, records transfers, and manages order. Yet his words are final. He reads the complaints, hears the homage, and rules. Sometimes he consults with jurors. Sometimes he makes decisions himself. The law is his to interpret but not to invent. Stewards are often outsiders, educated men brought in to manage a large estate. They may have served at another manor or trained at court. They understand ledgers, charters, and royal procedures, but they often lack knowledge of local custom. This creates tension. A steward might quote from a statute passed in Westminster. The villagers answer with a shrug, "That's not how we do it here." When steward and custom clash, the steward usually wins. But not always. Common conflicts and their consequences. You sit on the low bench and watch the court proceed. A man is fined for letting his dog run loose during sheep shearing. A widow is summoned for failing to repair her roof, a hazard to passers-by. A group of young men is cited for loud singing past curfew. The ale taster reports poor brewing at 3 cottages. One brewer is banned until Easter. Each case ends with a fine. Some are token, others are steep. But none result in imprisonment or corporal punishment. The manorial court does not jail or flog, it fines, restricts, and shames. Fines go to the Lord's coffers, but enforcement matters more than revenue. The court's primary purpose is to maintain order and reinforce obligation. The most serious cases, murder, rape, robbery, are escalated to the king's justices. But that's rare. Most crimes in the village are mundane, irritating, or disruptive. And they are handled here. Swiftly, locally, without lawyers. Manorial roles, writing power into parchment. After each ruling, the clerk scribes the result into the court roll, a narrow sheet of parchment, folded and tied with linen string. These rolls accumulate, stored in the manor chest or archives. If you later dispute a fine, the steward reads from the roll. At the Michaelmas court, in the 33rd year of the king, you were fined 3 pence for failing to attend boon work. The roll does not lie, or so you're told. In truth, the accuracy of the record depends on the clerk, the steward, and whether you've made enemies. A miswritten name, an added offense, these can follow you for years. You know villagers who have paid fines for deeds they never did because the roll said so. And yet without the roll, there is no memory beyond speech. You are caught between oral justice and written authority, each fallible, each powerful. Women, children, and the margins of justice. The manorial court is a man's world, but not exclusively. Women do appear, especially widows who hold land in their own right. They file complaints, defend property, and face fines like anyone else. They may be fined for poor brewing, broken fences, or failure to attend churching rituals after childbirth. Married women, however, are often legally absorbed into their husband's identity. They appear in the roles as wife of their autonomy diminished. This affects everything from landholding to liability. Children may be summoned for mischief, theft, or truancy, but punishments are light. The court often addresses the parents instead. Those truly outside the courts concern the landless, the transient. The very poor receive little protection and no representation. If they offend, they are expelled or ignored. If they are wronged, they have no recourse. Justice in this system is tethered to economic and social presence. To be heard, you must be visible, a landholder, a tenant, a contributor. Otherwise, the court does not see you. When custom becomes obstacle, you finally stand to speak your case. The steward listens, the homage nods, your neighbor shrugs, offering a weak defense. They wandered is all. But then an older man speaks. That strip was his father, and before that his grandfather, no question there. You feel a surge of relief. Custom for once favors you. The steward rules, 3 pence in damages to be paid in kind wheat or eggs. A mild fine, but a statement of right. You leave feeling heard. But as you walk away, another villager complains. Her daughter was groped at the last festival. The accused is a freeman, well connected. The steward dismisses it. Custom can protect, it can also excuse. And you begin to understand the limits of this world's justice. An unresolved thought. Later, as you prepare your evening pottage, you think about the court, the elm tree, the steward, the roll. You remember a story from the traveling friar who passed through last spring of distant cities where courts are formal, where scribes wear colored robes, where a man can bring evidence and make arguments, and a stranger decides the truth. It seems foreign, cold, but also fairer. You don't know if you trust a man in robes more than a neighbor with a long memory. But you wonder what happens when custom no longer fits the world it serves. The wind through the elm tree sounds different now. Its branches still arch over the meeting place. The villagers still gather. The steward still reads from the rolls, and the clerk still scratches his entries in brown ink. The forms persist, but something feels quieter, less urgent. Because beyond the manor, beyond the village, another kind of justice is taking shape, and the world that once lived entirely under the Lord's gaze is beginning to fade. It's not that the manorial court has vanished. It still functions, still issues fines for broken hedges and missing fence rails. But more and more, you hear of people petitioning the king's court, or seeking justice in town boroughs, or even calling upon royal justices when disputes exceed what custom can handle. The manorial court is still here, but its power is no longer absolute. Royal justice creeps in. In the old days, the king's court was distant literally and figuratively. Royal justice was for nobles, land disputes, and high crimes. It was expensive, slow, and written in Latin or Norman French. You couldn't read the summons even if it arrived. But in the 13th and 14th centuries, things change. Royal justices begin riding circuit, stopping in county towns to hear major cases. Over time, common law, a unified body of rulings and precedent, develops, increasingly codified and recorded. You hear stories. A tenant disputes his lord's claim to Harriet and wins in the king's court. A villain challenges forced labor and is declared free by royal decree. A merchant is punished in town, not manor, for cheating with false weights. These are not everyday stories, but they're no longer unheard of. The king's writ now reaches into manorial lands slowly, like a rising tide creeping over familiar shores. Borough courts and urban liberties. In towns and chartered boroughs, local courts governed by citizens take hold. These aren't manorial, they are municipal, tied to guilds, markets, and town charters. Their justice is based on contracts, commerce, and civic custom. They allow for more formal procedures, often in writing, and sometimes rarely you even see someone hire an advocate to speak on their behalf. These urban courts set a new precedent, law not rooted in land but in association. Rights are granted not because of tenure but because of citizenship, charter, or trade. For a rural villager, these courts are alien. But for your children growing up in a changing world, they may be the future. The weakening of lordly control. Your steward still presides, your reeve still summons you, but something has changed in their posture. Fewer people attend court, many fines go unpaid. Some tenants openly question their obligations, especially if they pay fixed money rents. Others point to contracts rather than customs. A few brandish seals and signatures that make even the steward pause. The homage, once the voice of the village, becomes harder to gather. Young men leave for towns. Widows claim exemptions. Some villagers now appeal to bishops' courts, especially for moral or inheritance matters. The Lord's power remains, but it is increasingly practical, not personal. He controls land. He owns property, but he no longer rules unchallenged. His steward writes fewer fines, and sometimes he waits for advice from above. The rise of written law and formal evidence. You remember the first time a neighbor brought a written contract to court. It was a lease penned by a traveling scribe, signed with witnesses and sealed in wax. The steward frowned. He asked if it was valid. The man nodded confidently. I paid 6 pence to have it drawn. The court accepted it. Suddenly, spoken memory had a rival. You could write a boundary into a charter. You could define a duty in ink. You could produce a sealed agreement that even the steward dared not challenge. This is the quiet revolution, the written word replacing remembered custom. You don't like it. It feels distant, alien, brittle, but you know it's powerful. And you begin to think, should you get a written lease for your own strips? Gender, class, and the limits of chain. Not everyone benefits from the changing tides. Women, especially married ones, remain legally absorbed into their husbands. While widows gain some freedom, especially in managing property, many legal systems still bar them from testifying in certain courts or representing themselves. The poor, particularly the landless, still struggle to be heard. Without property, they have no standing. Without coin, they cannot pay clerks or scribes. Serfs, where they still exist, often find royal courts unwilling to overturn their status. Freedom remains a personal victory, not a systemic right. The new justice, like the old, favors those with means: coin, land, education, or reputation. Still, the tools for appeal exist, and for those willing to learn them, a new kind of justice becomes possible. The endurance of the elm. Despite everything, the manorial court endures. Even into the 15th and 16th centuries, you find it ticking along in many villages. It deals with minor trespasses, community maintenance, and the small frictions of daily life. It's informal, familiar, local. A tenant might be fined for letting a dung heap spill into the lane, a brewer for underselling ale, a neighbor for failing to clean the ditches that prevent flooding. These aren't crimes, they are the maintenance of society. And perhaps that's why the manorial court survives, not because it's powerful, but because it's necessary. Even when royal courts handle disputes, or towns develop formal tribunals, villages still need a place to gather and settle the small things. Under the elm, you still find something rare: face-to-face justice. Final reflection: justice at the edge of chain. You are old now, you walk slowly, but you still attend the court even when not summoned. You sit beneath the elm, listen to the proceedings, nod when custom is upheld, squint when contracts are read. You see a world changing, not vanishing, but transforming. Custom becomes contract, memory becomes manuscript, the steward yields to the scribe, the homage bows to the seal. You wonder if the court will still exist when your grandchildren are grown. You hope it does, if only because justice should be close to the people who live it. But you also wonder what justice could look like if everyone could read, if every voice could be heard, and if law belonged to the many, not the few. The court beneath the elm is not perfect, it never was. But it taught you that even the smallest judgment matters, and that justice, like the village itself, must be tended or it withers. Story 4. A knight's obligation, training, loyalty, and land. You are born not in a castle, but in a stone manor with timber beams and a smoky hearth. The walls are cold in winter, the roof leaks after storms, and the horses are stabled close enough for you to smell them in the night. You are the second son of a knight, not a great lord, not a baron, just a man with a small holding of land, a coat of arms, and a duty to serve. You will not inherit land, that belongs to your elder brother. Your path is already chosen, you will be a knight. But before you wear armor or ride into battle, you must learn to serve. Because in the feudal world, a knight is not born, he is made, layer by layer, oath by oath, over many hard and humbling years. Page, A Boy's Introduction to Duty. At 7 years old, you are sent away to another knight's household, perhaps a relative, or the lord to whom your father owes service. You become a page. You clean boots, serve meals, run errands, and wake early to prepare fires in the great hall. You learn the rules of courtesy. Never speak with your mouth full, never turn your back to a superior, always bow before a lady. But it is not all polishing and posture. You begin to train your body. You wrestle other pages. You practice tumbling, lifting, running, and chasing. You learn how to care for horses, grooming, feeding, mucking stalls. You learn the parts of a saddle, the difference between a destrier and a palfrey, the names of weapons and their weight. Most importantly, you listen. You learn the stories of heroes and saints, of knights who kept their oaths, who died in service to their lords, to God, to country. Even then, you understand. A knight is not just a warrior, he is a vessel of duty. Squire service in arms. At 14, you become a squire. You are now an apprentice knight. You are assigned to a single knight, perhaps the one whose household you serve, and your world becomes narrower but deeper. You tend to his armor. You sharpen his sword. You accompany him on hunts and campaigns. You carry his banner. You learn to fight. First with wooden swords, then real ones. You learn to aim a lance at a ring while galloping. You practice in padded armor until you collapse in sweat. You are bruised often, scolded more, but slowly your movements become deliberate, your instincts sharpen. You also learn to read and write if your household allows it. At the very least, you memorize prayers, oaths, and the formulas for pledging loyalty. If you are lucky, you travel with your knight. You ride to tournaments or patrols. You see real skirmishes, bandits on the edge of the woods, a quarrel between lords turned violent, perhaps even a border war. You do not fight, but you watch. And you learn something they don't teach in the courtyard: how easily lives are spent in the service of loyalty. Knighting, ceremony, and symbol. When you are ready, usually around 21, you are dubbed a knight. The ceremony varies. Sometimes it is solemn and sacred. You bathe the night before, fast, confess, and keep vigil in a chapel with only a sword for company. At dawn, you are girded in armor, blessed by a priest, and touched lightly on the shoulder with a sword. Arise, sir. Other times, the knighting is more practical, a battlefield promotion, a token of thanks from a grateful lord. Still others are knighted at tournaments, in full public view, as part of the spectacle. Regardless of how it happens, your life changes in name, but in practice, your burdens multiply. You are now a man of war, but also of law, of loyalty, and of land. You owe military service to your liege typically 40 days per year, though it may vary by region and contract. You may be called to guard a castle, ride in a campaign, or simply stand in readiness. In return, you are granted land called a fief or paid scutage, money in lieu of direct combat. You are not a mercenary. You fight for duty, not coin. But the line blurs more often than you admit. The knight's equipment, heavy wealth. You now bear the tools of your trade, and they are expensive. Your armor may be chainmail or plate depending on the century and your wealth. A full suit is a mark of prestige, and its cost rivals that of a small house. You maintain it meticulously or pay someone to do so. Rust is your quiet enemy. You carry a sword, but also a lance, dagger, and perhaps a mace. You own at least one war horse, trained not just to ride but to fight, to trample, to kick, to obey commands amid chaos. You bear a coat of arms, registered and recognized. Heraldry is not just vanity, it is identification on the battlefield, legal status, and lineage all at once. You are now a symbol, and symbols must be maintained. Loyalty and lordship. The feudal contract at the heart of knighthood is simple in theory, but complex in practice. You owe fealty to your lord, perhaps a baron, an earl, or even a king. In return, he provides land, protection, and prestige. Your oaths are sacred. But what if he demands too much? What if he violates his own oaths? Feudal obligations often exist in layers. You may owe loyalty to one lord, who in turn is bound to another. Loyalties conflict. Battles between lords become civil wars. Some knights are caught between kinship and fealty, duty and justice. You are expected to serve without question. But history is full of knights who chose conscience over command and paid dearly for it. Beneath the pomp, feudal loyalty is a tightrope, and one rarely walked without consequences. The moral code, chivalry and contradiction. You are taught the chivalric code, a blend of Christian virtue, military honor, and courtly behavior. You are told to protect the weak and innocent, serve God and your Lord faithfully, be loyal, honest, and brave, never attack an unarmed man, show mercy to a defeated enemy. But in war, these rules falter. Villages burn, hostages are taken, ransoms are demanded. Chivalry, it turns out, is often idealized more in song than in practice. Still, the code matters. It is the ideal by which you are judged, even if imperfectly. It shapes your reputation, your marriage prospects, your future. And in a world where battles are short, brutal, and rare, your true currency is often honor, not victory. A question unanswered. You sit in the hall one night, your armor cooling after patrol, a goblet of weak wine in your hand. The fire crackles, your horse stabled, your squires dozing in the loft. You wonder not aloud, but quietly, what it means to serve so many masters. Your lord, your God, your code, your name. You wonder if, in the end, you fight for protection or for pride. You wonder if the next generation will carry sword with the same reverence. And you ask yourself, is knighthood a sacred duty, or simply a title worn by those lucky enough to afford it? You have worn the armor, sworn the oaths, and claimed the title. You are now a knight, not just a warrior, but a cog in the great machinery of feudal obligation, where power, war, and land ownership are inseparably entwined. Your life is one of rituals, seasons, and service, but the glamour of knighthood fades quickly under the weight of its realities. To be a knight is to live in the tension between duty and autonomy, between honor and survival, between the quiet maintenance of land and the violent call of war. And while your sword may rest on a rack for much of the year, you are never not a soldier. The 40 days of service. Your feudal contract stipulates it clearly: 40 days of military service per year. This is the traditional length of a knight's obligation to his lord, short, specific, and tied to the agricultural calendar. These 40 days may be spent patrolling a border, garrisoning a castle, or joining a campaign. They are usually unpaid service in exchange for land. But what happens when a war drags on, or when more men are needed? The answer is simple: scutage, a fee paid in lieu of personal service. If you cannot, or will not fight, your lord may accept coin instead. He then uses it to hire mercenaries, often seasoned professionals with no title, but plenty of experience. This creates tension. The old code says knights should fight for loyalty, but increasingly, wars are fought by those who fight for silver. And yet when the call comes, you go, not for coin, for honor, for obligation, and because to refuse would mean losing your land, your title, and your name. Feudal muster and the call to arms. When war breaks out, or when the king demands a campaign, the feudal host is summoned. It begins with a letter. A writ arrives from your lord or the sheriff. You are told where to report, what arms to bring, and how many men you must provide. If you hold land, you're expected to equip yourself and any retainers. You spend days gathering supplies. Your armor freshly oiled and repaired. Your horses shod and rested. Your tent and provisions, if the campaign will last. Your squires and men-at-arms, whom you must feed and discipline. Then you travel sometimes dozens of miles to the assembly point, where banners flutter and trumpets sound. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of knights and retainers gather under the flags of their lords. There is a sense of pageantry, but underneath it lies dread. Most knights do not relish battle, not because they lack courage, but because they understand the cost. Battle not as glorious as it seems. When combat finally comes, it is seldom what you imagined as a boy. Battles are chaotic, brutal, and brief. A charge may last minutes, a clash of shields and spears, a flurry of blows, screams, hoofbeats, and the dull thud of bodies hitting earth. Victory is often determined not by valor, but by positioning, terrain, weather, and luck. And when the battle ends, the dead are looted, not mourned. If you are captured, your status protects you. You may be ransomed, a profitable business for your captors. You may even be treated well, kept in a tower, fed decently, while negotiations continue. If you capture an enemy knight, he becomes your payday. You take his sword, his armor, his horse. Then you send word to his family or liege, pay or he stays. This is not chivalry. This is commerce by combat. The songs may speak of honor, but your ledger tells the truth. Castle duty and garrison life. Not every campaign leads to pitched battle. Often, your service is far less dramatic. You may be assigned to garrison a castle, one of your lord's strongholds. These are symbols of power, but also logistical centers. They store grain, house soldiers, and guard trade routes. Garrison life is dull but dangerous. You patrol walls, oversee supplies, resolve disputes among soldiers, and manage siege readiness. If war comes to you, you prepare for siege, perhaps the most grueling form of warfare in your world. Sieges can last months. Defenders suffer hunger, disease, boredom, and anxiety. Attackers suffer attrition, weather, and morale collapse. The true enemy is often time. You might not draw your sword once in such a siege, but you will feel the strain in every moment. The cost of knighthood. Your title gives you status, but it also bleeds your purse. You must maintain at least one warhorse, and ideally more. Own and upkeep armor, weapons, tents, banners, and retainers. Pay your squires, and feed everyone you bring on campaign. Replace broken gear, sometimes at great expense. Fund ransom if captured and pay others if you are the liege. Many knights fall into debt. Some sell land to cover campaign costs. Others marry for dowry, seeking wealth to sustain the role. Knighthood is not just a social title, it is a financial burden. You often feel more like a landed administrator, balancing books and overseeing fields, than a soldier of glory. And yet when the trumpet sounds, you still answer. Law, order, and local power. Outside of war, your role shifts from soldier to enforcer. As a knight, you are often appointed as sheriff, castellan, constable, justice of the peace. These roles are not honorary. You collect taxes, chase bandits, supervise courts, or manage towns. Your authority is not absolute, but it is respected. Sometimes this leads to abuse. There are knights who use their power to seize land, intimidate rivals, or crush peasants. But others serve, earnestly trying to maintain order in a turbulent world. You learn that steel does not rule by strength alone, but by administration, respect, and alliances. The knight and the church. Your relationship with the church is complex. You are expected to tithe, attend Mass, and uphold Christian values. Some knights take crusading vows, traveling to the Holy Land or Iberia to fight under the banner of the cross. But the church also criticizes your class. Clerics preach sermons condemning knights for pride, cruelty, and indulgence. Some try to reform knighthood, urging pious behavior, mercy, and restraint. You listen, you give alms, you confess, but you know that your world runs on oaths, not absolution. A question unanswered. One autumn evening, as your campaign ends and your horse walks wearily beside you on the forest path, you look back over the months. The coin you've spent, the blood you've seen, the land you've protected or ravaged, the prayers you've mumbled, the oaths you've kept. You wonder again, what binds this world together? Is it loyalty? Or is it the fear of losing what loyalty secures? You tug the reins, gaze upward at the stars, and you ask yourself, when a knight serves land, lord, and law but questions all three, what remains of his code? You are older now. Your armor hangs from the rafters of the great hall, no longer polished each morning. The war horse in the stable is a gentler breed than the destriers you once rode. You walk with a stiffness born not just of age, but of repetition, years of patrols, war councils, hunting rides, and the dull ache of waiting for orders. Once you believed knighthood was eternal, but now you see the world changing and knighthood with it. The old ways of land force service are weakening. The very soil that once held the feudal contract in place seems to shift beneath your feet. And as peace takes hold and kings grow stronger, the knight's role begins to unravel or perhaps transform. This is not just the end of your service. It is the end of an era. The rise of professional armies. The feudal host, once the backbone of medieval warfare, is becoming obsolete. Instead of summoning reluctant knights for 40 days of service, kings now hire standing armies. Paid soldiers, archers, pikemen, and light cavalrymen who fight not out of duty, but for coin. These are not knights. They lack coats of arms and noble lineage, but they are well-trained, adaptable, and most importantly available year-round. The knight, with his costly armor and rigid obligations, cannot compete with the efficiency of a paid footman or a longbowman who can reload and fire 3 times while the knight spurs his horse. Tournaments become more common than battles. Some knights earn fame not through campaigns but through staged jousts, courtly displays, or royal favor. You know knights who haven't seen a battlefield in 20 years but wear their titles proudly, managing estates and squabbling over legal precedents. Knighthood survives, but its military function is shrinking. The centralization of royal power. Your liege lord once held real authority, a private army, legal courts, vassals of his own. But now the king demands more. Across England, France, and other parts of Europe, monarchs are asserting control over taxation, law enforcement, judicial systems, the right to raise armies. Knights once loyal to their immediate lords are now often called directly by the crown, bypassing the old feudal pyramid. Royal sheriffs and justices take on the administrative roles you once held. The king's peace supersedes local disputes. The manorial court is still alive, but it no longer defines justice. Some knights are absorbed into the growing bureaucratic class. They become squires of the chamber, royal counselors, or commanders in permanent forces. Others, resistant to change, fade into irrelevant symbols of a time passing into memory. Changing landholding and inheritance. Your fief, once held on condition of military service, is now often held by charter, a document confirming ownership, rights, and freedoms. Lords increasingly prefer to lease land for rent rather than grant it for service. The line between knight and wealthy commoner begins to blur. Some merchants now own more land than barons. Some former serfs rise through careful marriages and clever management. The knight remains respected, but no longer essential. Your sons may inherit your estate, but they may never serve in armor. They may attend university, study law, join the clergy, manage the manor without ever drawing a sword. Knighthood becomes less of a calling and more of a courtesy. A title on paper, a name without a battle. The crisis of identity. You feel it in conversation, at feast days and in councils. What does it mean to be a knight in a world where war is professionalized, kings rule directly, loyalty is contractual, land can be bought and sold, honor is written, not earned? Some cling to chivalry, promoting it as a moral code. They speak of defending the weak, protecting women, and serving God. They support tournaments, patronize poets, and read romances about Arthur, Roland, and Charlemagne. But the wars you remember, long sieges, raiding, disease, and famine, bear little resemblance to these tales. The stories elevate the image. The history complicates it. You begin to understand. Knighthood is not disappearing, it is being romanticized. As it loses its power, it gains myth. The knight in the court. Some knights adapt. They find a new battlefield, the royal court. Here, success is measured in proximity to power, in influence, in favors granted and withheld. Knights become courtiers, mastering etiquette, rhetoric, and flattery. Tournaments serve not as training for war, but as entertainment for royalty. Chivalric orders like the Order of the Garter in England or the Order of the Golden Fleece in Burgundy emerge, honoring knights for loyalty, prestige, and personal virtue. These orders promote an idealized vision of knighthood, often disconnected from military service. They become instruments of royal propaganda, showcasing the king's glory through the chivalry of his court. You watch with cautious respect. There is wisdom in adaptation. But you also feel the distance grow between the Knights of Steel and the Knights of Silk. The final campaigns. Even as knighthood fades, it is not gone. In places like Spain, knights continue to fight in the Reconquista, a centuries-long campaign to reclaim territory from Muslim rule. In Eastern Europe, knights face the threat of Ottoman expansion. Elsewhere, knights serve in crusades, sometimes in far-off lands, sometimes in political campaigns masked as holy wars. These later crusades are smaller, often more symbolic, but they allow the knight to cling to his martial and religious identity, even as the world around him moves on. You hear of knights in Italy becoming condottieri, military contractors serving city-states for pay. Mercenaries in armor, their loyalty purchased, their valor negotiable. It is a far cry from your own oaths. But the steel is the same. The knight's legacy. You sit beneath the banners of your house, some faded, some newly sewn by your daughters. A traveling bard sings of Tristan and Isolde, of Lancelot and the Grail. The children listen in wonder. The squires smile knowingly. You do not interrupt, because you know that stories preserve what service cannot. Knighthood, once a practical role, is now an ideal. And ideals live longer than armies. In time, your armor may rust, your name may be forgotten, but the idea of the knight valiant, loyal, principled will endure. In books, in rituals, in titles passed down to men who never trained a horse or lifted a sword. It is both comforting and melancholic. To be the last of something. To live long enough to see it honored more in memory than in deed. Final reflection, the weight of the sword. You rise slowly. The sun sets behind the hill where your youngest now trains with the sword you once carried into battle. He strikes awkwardly as you once did, but his eyes are clear. You taught him to read. He speaks 2 languages. He can write a will, manage a ledger, recite verses. He will inherit your land, but likely not your burdens. Still, you wonder if he will understand the weight of the sword not in metal, but in meaning. And so you ask, as the last chapter of your life begins, when the age of the knight ends, does its spirit vanish or simply change its armor? Story 5. The quiet power of the steward bureaucracy in the Middle Ages. The lord rides through the village in polished armor, his cloak fluttering, his destrier well-groomed. He nods to the peasants, accepts bows and curtsies, and disappears into the manor house. But he does not manage the estate. He does not balance the accounts. He does not supervise the harvest, inspect the mill, or summon the court. You do. You are the steward, a man who rides without armor, who does not own the land, but who knows everything that happens on it. In the great machine of the medieval manor, you are not the horse or the plow. You are the gear that turns them both. Your authority is quiet but pervasive. You write nothing into law, but you decide what is enforced and what is ignored. Where the lord embodies power, the steward executes it. And so begins the story of the bureaucrat behind the knight, the pen behind the sword. Origins of the steward. The word steward originates from the Old English stigward, keeper of the hall. But by the high medieval period, your role extends far beyond the lord's home. You are administrator, record keeper, manager, auditor, legal officer, enforcer of custom. You may come from a humble background, perhaps the son of a freeman, a minor landholder, or a successful reeve. Or you may have been trained in a noble household, educated enough to read, write, and reckon accounts. You are not a priest, but you may read Latin. You are not a judge, but you preside over the manor court. You are not a knight, but you carry more authority than most. In many manors, you know more about how the estate runs than the lord himself. And the villagers, they know better than to cross you. Duties and domains. Your day begins before sunrise. You review the accounts carefully copied onto rolls or tallied on wax tablets. How much grain was milled? How many sheep were shorn? Who failed to appear for boon work? Which tenants owe rent this quarter? You walk the domain lands, inspecting fences, checking on plow teams, assessing the health of crops. You examine the mill, ensuring the miller takes only what he is owed and not more. You visit the manor bakehouse, the fish pond, and sometimes the woodland, ensuring no one has stolen timber or poached game. You may even supervise repairs, ditches, bridges, granaries, barns. You record expenditures, hire craftsmen, and arrange payments in coin or kind. You maintain constant oversight, but not by force. Your greatest tool is the roll and the reckoning. Everyone knows, if the steward writes it down, it becomes law. The court and the roll. When the manorial court meets monthly, seasonally, or as needed, you preside. Not as a judge, but as a representative of the Lord. You read the roll aloud. Who brewed ale without license? Who let their pigs run wild? Who delayed plowing? Who died and who claims the land? You fine offenders, approve transfers, oversee oaths, and record every word. The court roll is your legacy, a parchment record of everything the manor does, compiled over years, even generations. It is written in Latin, often abbreviated, in a hand that only other stewards or clerks can decipher. It is the memory of the manor, and you guard it with your life. Sometimes villagers dispute it. They say, "That's not how it was," but you hold the ink, and the ink does not forget. Taxes and tallies. Beyond law and labor, you manage rent and revenue. Each tenant owes something. Labor on the domain. Goods, eggs, honey, timber. Coin if on a money rent. You ensure it's collected. You tally tithes owed to the church, tallage demanded by the Lord, aids for weddings or knightings, fines imposed by the court, and feudal incidents like Harriets or reliefs. You prepare annual accounts called compoti for the Lord or his agents. These detailed documents outline income and expenditures, harvest yields, livestock inventories, building repairs, surpluses or deficits. They are dry, precise, and utterly essential. The Lord's financial health depends on your accuracy, so does your job. If the Lord discovers missing coin or miscounted grain, your neck is on the line. So you count, then count again. Authority without a sword. You carry no weapon, you wear no chainmail, but your word can find, displace, or impoverish. The villagers both fear and resent you. They whisper that you take too much from the mill, that your tallies are always heavier than their harvests, that your scribbles are half lies, that you're just a mouthpiece for a distant lord who never sets foot in the village. But they still come to you for decisions, for permissions, for land disputes and grazing rights and questions of inheritance. Because you hold the seal, and in the eyes of the law, the seal speaks louder than the plow. You are not loved, but you are indispensable. Between the Lord and the land, your position is precarious. If the villagers revolt, you are their first target. If the Lord grows suspicious, you are the first to be replaced. If the harvest fails, you must decide who gets what and who goes without. You belong to neither world. You are too literate for the peasants, too common for the nobility. And yet you see both. You watch how the villagers survive patching roofs with bracken, swapping seed grain in secret, lying about their flock's size. You do not always report them, because you understand that strict law breaks communities. But you also see how the lords think, demanding more rent, questioning yields, threatening to enclose land or raise fines. You know that power demands records, and you make sure those records are precise. You walk the line between survival and extraction. Every day, a question unanswered. At dusk, you sit at your desk with a candle, your quill hovering over the parchment. You prepare to write the final tallies for the year. You hesitate. A tenant's harvest was poor. You know why: flooded fields, not laziness. He owes more than he can pay. The record must reflect it, or not. You could lessen the amount, adjust the entry, help him survive the winter. But if your books are questioned, what then? You dip your quill in ink, and you ask yourself, when justice is measured in numbers and power in parchment, where does mercy find its place? The fields have failed. Not once but twice in the span of 3 years. The villagers grumble louder now, their faces hollow with hunger. The mills are quieter. The bakehouse yields fewer loaves. The court finds fewer offenders, not because behavior has improved, but because many have simply vanished. This is not the fault of the steward, nor the reeve, nor even the lord. This is the work of the climate, the soil, and the slow turn of fate. And yet, in the middle of the crisis, it is you, the steward, who must find order in the collapse and math in the misery. Famine and its administrative toll. Famine is not just a disaster of hunger, it is a catastrophe of records. Each failed harvest unbalances the carefully maintained accounts. The steward's perfect system of labor, yield, dues, and fines becomes a mess of missing entries, uncollected rents, postponed court days, and conflicting obligations. The laborers cannot work if they're weak. The craftsmen flee to better-fed towns. The sheep die of cold because no one has hay to spare. The mills fall silent for lack of grain. Your job now is not just to record it, is to triage. Who owes what? Who can't pay? Who will pay next season? And who will never return? You adjust tallies, you estimate losses, you negotiate with bailiffs and suppress fines. You submit reports that make your lord wince. You try, through sheer calculation, to keep the system from breaking. But famine doesn't care for accuracy. It demands adaptation. The Black Death and the steward's burden. And then one spring, a traveler brings the plague. The air is warm, the fields look promising, but death moves quicker than the seasons. It starts in the port towns, then spreads inward along trade routes. Within months, villages empty. Whole families die in a week. The churchyards overflow, so do the ditches. As steward, you are not spared the disease, but you are spared its first strike. And that is a burden in itself. Because now, you are not just managing labor and harvest, you are recording death. Names struck from the tenant rolls. Inheritance claims complicated by the death of heirs. Fields left untended. Entire manorial systems without peasants. What do you do when the villain who owed 5 days of plowing is dead, and there's no one to replace him? You start by combining plots, then you forgive labor obligations, then you beg the reeve to recruit more workers from other manors. You do what bureaucrats have always done in the face of collapse. You write it down, even as it falls apart. The labor shortage and changing custom. In the aftermath of the Black Death, the survivors hold the power. Suddenly, there are fewer laborers than ever before and more land than they can till. Rents go unpaid, but not from poverty. Now, the peasants are bold. They say, "I will only plow if you double my wage. I will work, but not for my lord, he demands too much. I will leave this manor and go to another, where the steward is kinder." For the first time in living memory, custom is questioned. As steward, you record this resistance. You present it to the lord. Some lords respond with wage controls, fixed labor rates, enforced by the court. Others impose fines for leaving the manor without permission. But the power dynamic has shifted. The pen may record the law, but the plow controls the future. And you, once the unchallenged enforcer, now find yourself negotiating. The steward must now be a diplomat, not just a calculator. Rebellion and record keeping. With disruption comes unrest. In the late 14th century, the peasants' revolt erupts in England. Triggered by heavy taxes and labor restrictions, thousands of villagers rise against their lords, storming manor houses, burning records, even executing stewards. Why? Because the steward represents everything they resent. The tally of their dues, the court that finds them, the ledger that holds their names. In some places, court rolls are thrown into rivers. In others, the stewards flee before the mob arrives. The pen, so long a symbol of quiet control, is now a target. You survive, perhaps by luck, perhaps by loyalty to your manor, but the message is clear. The age of unquestioned authority is over. Reforming the manor. In the decades after plague and revolt, the manor system begins to change. As steward, you do not dictate this change, but you record it, facilitate it, and try to stay ahead of it. Key reforms emerge. Fixed cash rents replace labor dues. Free tenancies expand, giving peasants more mobility. Wage labor becomes standard. Fewer villains remain, most are tenants by contract, not custom. The steward's role shifts again. Less time is spent chasing labor. More time is spent managing leases, negotiating agreements, and turning the manor into an economic enterprise, not a feudal one. You might work with lawyers now. You might oversee estate development. You might manage lands hundreds of miles away, sending reports to absentee landlords who live in London or Paris. The court still meets, the roles are still kept, but the tone has changed. The manor is no longer a self-contained world. It is a business, and you are its chief officer. The rise of the professional clerk. As the 15th century dawns, the steward is not gone, but he is less personal, more institutional. Where once a steward served one manor for life, now he may serve multiple estates. He may work through correspondence, issuing commands from a central office. He may keep books in ink on paper, not just parchment. Some stewards have university training. They read Roman law. They draft contracts in French or Latin. They operate not by memory and custom, but by policy and record. The peasants barely recognize this new steward. He visits rarely. He speaks through agents. He doesn't walk the fields, he reads reports. He is still powerful, but he is no longer feared. He is professional. And with that transformation, the medieval steward begins his long transition into the modern bureaucrat. A question unanswered. The sun sets over your manor, smaller now than it was before. Some fields lie fallow, not from failure but from choice. The tenants grow wheat not for survival but for profit. Your desk is tidier. Your roles are more formal. You spend more time writing letters than issuing commands. And yet the weight of your work remains. You set down your pen and stare at the seal beside you, worn, but still respected. You wonder, in a world that outgrows the customs it once lived by, what remains of the old authority? Is it the signature, the memory, or simply the fact that someone must still keep the books? By now, you are more than a steward. You are the scribe of a world in transition, the long and steady hand that has documented not just fields and finds, but the quiet reshaping of society. You have seen plague and rebellion, famine and prosperity, and through it all, your task has remained constant. To record, to enforce, and to adjust. The manor is no longer what it was in your youth. Its rhythms have changed. The peasants now sign leases. The domain lands are often leased out entirely. The lord resides in town more than in the hall. The reeve is now more likely a hired bailiff. But you remain, because someone must ensure the estate functions not as a fief, but as a business. And the legacy of your work stretches far beyond your manor gate. From custom to contract. Once every transaction on the manor was governed by custom. People knew what they owed and what they could expect because their parents had done the same, and their grandparents before them. The steward enforced these customs, recording variations and overseeing transitions. But now, custom is giving way to contract. Tenants sign formal agreements with specific terms. Rent is paid in coin, not labor. Disputes are settled not by manorial courts, but by written appeals and legal documents. The steward's pen, once used to capture oral traditions and local arrangements, is now used to draft legally binding texts. Lease agreements with clear durations and rents. Labor contracts for seasonal workers. Purchase orders for grain, timber, or oxen. What was once a memory-driven economy becomes a paper-driven one. And the steward becomes the architect of a new legalism where proof lies not in reputation, but in ink. Estates as enterprises. By the 15th and 16th centuries, many lords view their manors not as centers of feudal power, but as income-producing assets. They lease entire domain farms to wealthy tenants or emerging yeomen. They hire agents, sometimes stewards, sometimes professional estate managers to oversee vast holdings spread across counties. The steward is no longer expected to know every tenant by name or walk every field. He is expected to maximize yield, balance the books, report efficiently to distant landowners. Some stewards rise in prominence, overseeing multiple estates and handling thousands of acres. They are trusted with investment decisions, land improvement schemes, and market negotiations. Their reports become financial documents, filled with tables, summaries, and suggested reforms. The estate becomes a proto-corporate entity, and the steward becomes a middle manager of medieval capitalism. The professionalization of record-keeping. Your rolls are no longer copied by candlelight in the kitchen. They are bound in books, often in English, not Latin. They are sometimes maintained by clerks who work under you. You still sign your name. You still check the accounts. But increasingly, you are part of a system, a network of administrators, accountants, and legal advisors. The rise of royal bureaucracy mirrors your transformation. Just as lords need stewards to manage manors, kings need clerks to run realms. Royal tax collectors, justices of the peace, chancery scribes, exchequer officials. You share their skills, literacy, numeracy, and loyalty not to charisma, but to process. In time, the methods you use, account books, lease rolls, audit procedures, will become the basis for government administration, colonial management, and even early corporate bookkeeping. In other words, you helped invent modern administration. Quietly, without armor, without ever marching to war. The steward and the rise of the state. As national governments begin to form, the role of the steward fades from individual manors but expands in principle. In England, France, and elsewhere, the skills of the steward migrate to larger institutions. Parliament requires rolls and clerks. Taxation needs assessors and collectors. Courts depend on record-keeping and precedent. You may retire or die in obscurity, but your methods, your neat tallies, your exacting fines, your seasonal reports live on in public offices and private ledgers. Indeed, by the 17th century, the word stewardship will evolve into a broader term: responsible management of any resource, be it land, people, or wealth. You were a steward of a manor. But your true legacy is this: you were a steward of order. And in an age before banks, before printing presses, before formal constitutions, order was the foundation of everything. Echoes in the modern world. Centuries later, when historians open the dusty rolls of your manor, perhaps tucked in a cathedral archive, or buried in a private collection, they will find names of forgotten men fined for grazing their pigs too early, measurements of barley yields in wet years, records of rents, fines, and contracts. And in those details, they will glimpse a living world. Because you preserved it. You wrote down the mundane, the trivial, the routine. And in doing so, you left a map of daily life more accurate than any chronicle of kings or catalog of battles. Where the knight's sword rusts, your ink remains. Where the lord's name fades, your records endure. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are exact. Final reflection: the pen that built the world. You sit at your desk one last time. Your hands are older now, the ink stains never fully fade, the estate is calm, there are fewer disputes, the ledgers are in balance. And yet, you feel the gravity of your task as you write the final line in this year's roll. You have never led a charge, built a castle, or passed a law. But you have shaped your world by keeping it legible. And so, as you seal the roll and extinguish the lamp, you ask yourself, when history forgets the stewards but remembers what they wrote, who truly authored the past? Story 6. The manorial reeve elected authority among the peasantry. The morning frost clings to the thatched roofs. Smoke rises in thin, gray wisps from hearths lit before dawn. In the open, muddy lane that runs between cottages, you stand waiting not for orders from your lord, but for decisions from your neighbors. Because today, you are no longer just a peasant. You are the reeve, the elected voice of the manor's common folk, the one chosen to enforce the rules among your own kind. You are no steward, no knight, no priest. You still sow, reap, and thatch like the rest. But now you also summon the court, track obligations, mediate disputes, and keep the peace. And though you wear no badge, carry no sword, and sign no seal, your authority is felt every day. This is your story. The story of a peasant who governs other peasants. What is a reeve? In a medieval manner, the reeve is a crucial figure, the bridge between the ruling lord and the laboring villagers. While the steward represents the landlord, the reeve represents the tenants. You are elected annually, sometimes by voice vote, sometimes by show of hands, sometimes behind closed doors. Whether admired or resented, your selection is rooted in the recognition that someone must handle the organization of labor on the Lord's domain, the collection of dues and fines from fellow villagers, the delivery of goods or coin to the Lord's steward, the presentation of grievances from tenant farmers. You are essentially the manager of the manor's workforce. And unlike the steward, who might disappear for weeks or months at a time, you are always present, shoveling manure, mending fences, leading oxen teams, and calling your neighbors to court when duty demands it. A life of dual allegiance. As reeve, you walk a narrow line. You are one of the villagers born in the same huts, fed by the same fields, bound by the same customs. But you are also the enforcer of the manor's will, and this makes your position precarious. The steward expects you to ensure labor is completed, from plowing and sowing to thrashing and harvesting. Report delinquents, those who skip corvée duties or mismeasure their grain. Collect rents and dues, in kind, in labor, and in coin. Account for livestock and tools, especially those held communally or owned by the Lord. But your fellow peasants expect you to advocate for leniency, push back against excessive demands, keep punishments fair, shield them from the steward's worst excesses. So you negotiate, you smooth things over, you write a name in the margin instead of the main role, you excuse an absence when you know a child is sick. But you must also deliver. Because if the Lord's hay isn't cut, or his pigs underfed, or his rent short, you are blamed. The labor calendar and your role. Your year as reeve follows the agricultural calendar, and your work reflects it. Spring. Oversee the plowing of the domain's fields. Track seed usage and enforce proper planting. Record mandays worked by each villain. Summer. Organize weeding parties and the first hay cuts. Assign oxen teams to shared duties. Mediate disputes over pasture use and water rights. Autumn. Supervise the harvest, a critical time when the Lord's grain is gathered. Manage storage in barns and tally yields. Coordinate milling and bread production. Winter. Inventory tools, animals, and repairs. Deliver full reports to the steward. Help prepare the court rolls for the new year. You do all this while maintaining your own plot, feeding your family, and surviving like any other peasant. Being reeve is not a privilege, it is a burden, and often one you cannot refuse. Why accept the role? You didn't ask to be reeve, few do. But when the steward approaches and says, "The village has spoken," you accept. Why? Because refusal is dangerous. Refuse, and you could be fined or marked as disloyal. You might be accused of shirking communal responsibility. Worse, others may think you fear the job because you have something to hide. But there are incentives. Freedom from certain labor duties during your year in office. Access to surplus grain or coin left over from manorial dues. Influence, if not power, then at least the ability to shape how rules are applied. Respect, though it is usually quiet and short-lived. Still, for many reeves, the goal is simple. Survive your year, balance your books, and pass the job to the next poor soul. Conflict and compromise. As reeve, you are at the center of every conflict. A tenant accuses another of stealing thatch. A widow seeks leniency on rent after her husband's death. A young man refuses to work his boon days, arguing he's a freeman. Each case falls to you first in conversation, then in the manorial court. And sometimes the steward and the tenants disagree. You might side with your neighbors and risk the steward's disapproval. Side with the steward and earn your neighbor's hatred. But you also learn when to delay action, when to forget a name, when to suggest a compromise. Because you understand that maintaining harmony is more valuable than asserting power. Your influence doesn't come from orders. It comes from trust. And trust in a medieval village is everything. The emotional cost. By the end of your term, you feel it. You've been accused of betrayal, of favoritism, of cowardice. You've been asked to explain why a villager was fine but not another, why one family's rent increased, why the steward's piglets received more fodder than the villagers. You have seen marriages break under pressure, neighbors become enemies, brothers argue over oxen. And through it all, you have smiled, nodded, recorded, and carried the tension alone. It wears on you, even if you succeed. Because you know that in a few months, you will be one of them again. And the next reeve will sit in your place, watching you, judging you. A question unanswered. Tonight you sit outside your cottage, the fire is low. The steward has accepted your latest report. The villagers are quiet, and tomorrow the fields await. You wonder, when power is shared but never secure, when trust must be earned every day, what does it truly mean to lead your own people? The manor's outer world, the lord's halls, the steward's ledgers, the court's seals seems remote today. Here, among the fields and fences, it is the reeve who is visible, who is present, who must act. The steward may wield the lord's authority, but the reeve knows the names of every family in the village. He knows who quarrels over hedges, who shirks plowing, who borrowed a sheep and returned it half-fed. And when it is time to enforce the law or levy a fine, it is not a distant official who must confront the villagers. It is you. The manorial court and the reeve's role. The manorial court is the village's legal heartbeat. It is here that disputes are settled, land transfers are approved, offenses against manorial custom are punished, and you as reeve are expected to present offenders, those who brewed ale without license, let livestock roam, or failed to attend boon work. Bear witness. As someone who lives among the people, your testimony carries weight. Record or report fines to the steward or clerk. Ensure orders are executed, fines paid, duties fulfilled, fences rebuilt. Sometimes you are called to mediate before a matter reaches court. Your job is to prevent escalation, resolve quarrels quietly. Because the fewer cases that reach the steward, the better the manor runs. And the fewer enemies you make. Quiet resistance in a loud system. The manorial system is built on hierarchy. Lord above steward, steward above reeve, reeve above peasant. But the line between reeve and peasant is thin. You walk it every day. And sometimes you must bend the rules. Let a family skip a week's work because of illness. Delay reporting a broken tool so repairs can be made quietly. Underreport a yield to give a family breathing room. This is not rebellion, it is resistance by discretion. You know the steward has never knelt in a flooded field to sow barley in March wind. You know he doesn't see the blistered hands or hear the infant crying in the night when the bread runs out. So you temper justice with understanding. But this discretion is dangerous. Too much leniency and the steward questions your loyalty. Too little and the villagers turn against you. Every decision carries risk. You survive by choosing wisely and by keeping your mouth shut when needed. Gender widowhood and the reeve's discretion. In many cases, The reeve must act in matters of domestic life, especially where widows and inheritance are concerned. A husband dies. His widow wishes to retain their plot. Legally, she must pay a Harriet death duty, have the land formally re-granted, possibly take a new husband to keep tenancy. You know her. You know the strength of her sons, the labor she can provide, the threat of hunger she faces. You can advocate for her in court, delay reporting the vacancy, quietly negotiate leniency on the Harriet. These decisions don't make the rolls, but they make the difference between survival and dispossession. You are not a legislator. You are a gatekeeper standing between law and lived life. Conflict with the steward. Not all stewards are harsh, but many are detached. When yields fall or rents go unpaid, stewards often assume deceit rather than misfortune. You see the weather, they see the balance sheet. Sometimes they demand extra labor from already exhausted tenants, fines for minor transgressions, reassignment of land from struggling families to more reliable tenants. And you must respond. You may push back, quietly, respectfully. You might say, the man is sick, his boy is too young, they'll pay after the harvest. Sometimes it works. Other times you are overruled. Then you must do something harder. Return to your neighbors and enforce an order you never supported. You see the way they look at you no longer as a fellow farmer, but as a messenger of cruelty. In those moments you ask yourself, who am I really serving? When rebellion brews, in rare years, years of plague, taxation, or bitter harvest, anger spreads. And sometimes it turns outward. You hear murmurs in the alehouse. They tax us but never bleed. The steward doesn't know hunger. Why should we serve men who live far from our toil? In such years, reeves face an impossible position. You are seen as a tool of the Lord if you enforce duties, a traitor to your class if you don't, a coward if you remain silent, a target if revolt comes. In times of rebellion like the peasants' revolt of 1381, some reeves are spared because they are known to be fair. Others are the first to be punished because no one forgets who signed the roll. Your choices in calmer times determine your fate in chaos. The reeve's annual account. At the end of your term, you must present your account. This includes all labor performed, all dues collected, all tools maintained or lost, all livestock deaths explained, any shortfall justified. This is a terrifying moment, because even a small discrepancy, a missing sickle, a dead calf, a miscounted workday can result in fines, accusations, legal action. Some reeves leave office with debt, others face court scrutiny, many never serve again. But a few clever, fair, discreet are re-elected. Not because the job is loved, but because trust is a scarce thing, and once earned it is precious. A question unanswered. You've completed your account. The steward accepts it with only a brief raised eyebrow. The tenants breathe easier. Tomorrow the new reeve will take over. You return to your plow, to your family, to your place. But you wonder, when you live between two powers, one that rules by law and one that survives by labor, can you ever truly belong to either? The reeve's year begins with a voice vote, a bowed head, and a handshake in the manor court. But for centuries, the position would begin to disappear almost as quietly as it arrived, not with rebellion or fire, but with contracts and coin. By the end of the medieval period, the office of reeve, once a cornerstone of rural governance, becomes increasingly obsolete, not because the role failed. On the contrary, it succeeded so well that society outgrew it. In this final chapter of your story, we witness the slow unraveling of a system and the final season of the reeve, enclosure, and the rise of commercial farming. By the 15th and 16th centuries, something is happening to the fields you've always known. Hedges appear where once there were open strips. Pastures that had been shared for centuries are now fenced off and privately leased. Whole fields are consolidated into sheep walks. This is the beginning of enclosure, a sweeping economic and social transformation that replaces communal subsistence farming with market-oriented agriculture. And it reshapes the Reeves world. There are fewer villains to organize. Common obligations vanish. The Lord no longer needs coordinated labor, only reliable rent. As a result, the communal rhythm of the manor begins to fade. The Reeve, once the conductor of peasant life, now finds himself with less to conduct. The agricultural calendar remains, but the need for an elected peasant manager shrinks. Commutation of services. One of the Reeve's primary duties was managing labor obligations, ensuring people performed the right duties at the right time. But increasingly, lords realize something. It is easier and often more profitable to accept money instead of labor. This process, called commutation, accelerates in the late medieval period. Peasants pay scutage, money in lieu of military service, rent instead of corvée, and fixed fines instead of appearing in court. And with that shift, the need to monitor labor diminishes. The Reeves coordination role declines. Duties become standardized, written into leases rather than negotiated in court. You no longer need to wake the village before sunrise to ensure the barley is sown. Instead, the tenant hands over a few coins, and you record it in the steward's roll. Efficient, predictable, and steadily eroding your authority. The rise of paid officials. For centuries, the Reeve was a servant elected from among equals. But as estate management becomes more professional, lords begin to prefer hired officials over community elections. Instead of a villager Reeve, the manor employs a bailiff paid, often external, accountable only to the lord. The bailiff manages leases, collects rents, and organizes repairs. The job is full-time, trained, and devoid of communal obligations. In large manors, the steward is supplemented by surveyors, clerks, and estate managers. You, the Reeve, are simply not necessary anymore. And in time, the office is absorbed, sidelined, or quietly abandoned. No revolt, no ceremony, just absence. The Black Death and social upheaval. You lived through the Black Death. It was a horror, a slow, smothering wave that silenced entire villages and made funeral bells as common as birdsong. But it also transformed labor forever. With so many dead, labor became scarce and valuable. Peasants could demand better terms. Lords, desperate to maintain productivity, had no choice but to offer cash or freedom. Some villages elected Reeves still. Others negotiated directly. Others fell under the sway of market forces and agents. The death of a third of the population did more to change the manorial structure than any war. And it made the Reeve's role increasingly fragile. Memory of the Reeve in early modern England. By the 17th century, the Reeve is more memory than office. In some manorial records, the term still appears. In others, it vanishes completely, replaced by bailiff or collector. Where Reeves do persist, they often serve ceremonial functions, helping open the manor court. Nominal roles, signing land transfer records, as relics of a dying system. And yet their fingerprints remain. In the structure of local government, in the organization of parish life, in the idea that community should choose its own regulators. In the evolving English village, where churchwardens, constables, and jurors take new roles, the echo of the Reeve remains. Not in title, but in function. The Reeve in records and reflections. Historians, centuries later, pore over manorial roles, fascinated by the lives of people long forgotten. They find Reeve reports written in shaky Latin. Court rolls signed with thumbprints or crooked letters. Notes of barley shortfalls, tool inventories, and oxen deaths. These are not the stories of lords or heroes. They are the administrative debris of village survival. And among them, they find you the Reeve. Not famous, not powerful, but pivotal. Because you were the thread that tied the manorial system together, year after year, in mud and frost and sweat. Final reflection, the peasant governor. You never ruled, not truly. But you did something more difficult. You managed. You bore the weight of expectations from both above and below. You enforced justice. You granted leniency. You endured blame and vanished into anonymity. And though your office faded with time, the principle endured. That those closest to the people should lead them. That justice begins with familiarity. That governance requires not only law, but trust. So as the Reeve disappears from history's roll, we ask, how many other forgotten figures between the great and the powerless have held the world together, simply by showing up every day to do the work?